Okay, good. So today we will start with unit number 7, and unit 7 is human physiology. And as I said earlier as well, I am telling you now that human physiology part, that is between unit 6 and 7, although there is a fair balance of number of questions every single NET exam, but in December NET exam they tend to favor more unit 7 questions and lucrative question from unit 7, while in June NET exam they favor more of unit 6 questions compared with unit 7. So it's kind of an observation comparing few years question paper. So if you're preparing for the December season, it's always better to go with unit 7 in much more details than the one we are preparing for the June session. Okay, so again in unit 7, as we know, it's again a huge unit and a lot of topics that are involved in it, lot of topics and subtopics, which is very difficult to cover within that mentioned period of time. Although we want to study in a very suggestive manner for the unit number 7, because if someone is from unit 7 background, that is if someone is from human physiology background, then obviously this is your subject and you should study it with much care, I believe, because you can prepare it better than others. But if you are not from the background of human physiology, in that case follow this suggestive session so that you cover most of the part of unit 7 with the help of this animations and all the other topics that I'm going to share. So first of all, unit 7 is divided into several different types of body systems. We'll talk about that. One is this endocrine system, second one digestive system, third one nervous system. Okay, now let me also tell you the associated subtopics from each. Endocrine system, from endocrine system you need to know the different glands in our body. For example, the glands like pituitary glands, as well as other glands like thyroid glands, parathyroid glands. Those are the things, and along with that you need to know what kind of hormones they produce and what kind of hormones are produced by all these glands, and not only the type of hormones that they produce, the function of each of those hormones and the deficiency disorders associated with those hormones, because there are two types of deficiency for each hormone: hyperactivation and hyperactivation of those hormones. That you need to prepare as well. Okay, that's from the endocrine system. Okay, as well as you need to know the regulation of a release of hormone, few of them. Then second is digestive system. In digestive system is not very much important, but the question you'll kind of expect from digestive system is the digestive secretions, again the type of proteins and enzymes that are involved in the digestion, chemical digestion process in our body. And the chemical digestion process means all the enzymes that are involved to digest carbohydrate, proteins and lipid in our body. Apart from that, the digestive system disorders linked with it. Okay, then the third one is nervous system. This is very important. Nervous system, they always ask one question from nervous system, and especially it's always linked with the nerve impulse, that is a part of action potential. Okay, so you need to know about the resting membrane potential and action potential. Okay, how action potential is originated, how action potential propagates, and things like that. That is from the nervous system. Now cardiovascular system is also very important, where you need to study the intrinsic conduction system as well as the cardiac cycle and how cardiac cycle works, how it linked with circulating the blood throughout the body. And second thing is the blood vessels, like the three types of blood vessels: artery, veins, and all those. Okay, and the third one, I just forgot the word here: arteries, veins, and obviously the intermediate of that. What is that? I just forgot the name. Anyone? What is the intermediate that connects artery and veins together? Capillary. No, not the heart, obviously. Blood capillaries as well, right? And other things that you need to prepare is the intrinsic conduction system. Sorry, among it, intrinsic conduction system, which is linked with the cardiac cycle as well. Intrinsic conduction system works like origin of action potential in heart that helps in propagating that response from the atrium to the ventricle, and that process involved the natural pacemaker, that is SA node and AV node, bundle of His, Purkinje fiber, all these things you need to know from cardiovascular system. Then fifth one is excretory system. Excretory system is important in terms of the nephron structure. You need to know the formation of urine and how exactly urine is formed, and each and every different section of nephron, especially the tubule of nephron, that is proximal tubule, Henle's loop, as well as the distal convoluted tubule, and from all those tubules you need to know their absorbance of different factors as well as the release factors, everything. Okay, and this is pretty much it if you study this. And sixth, respiratory system is also there, which is involved with the gas exchange is most important from here. Apart from the respiratory distress and lung volume, lung capacity related math problems, they sometimes can ask that as well. And obviously diseases associated with respiratory system. So these are the 6 different body systems that are involved, and you also need so these are the type of topics and subtopics you need to prepare for all these body systems. So today we will talk about endocrine system, digestive system, as well as a little bit of nervous system if possible. So let's begin with endocrine system. I will not explain, like I will not extend the idea of one thing that we already have studied. In endocrine system, it's nothing but the cell signaling. It's all the cell signaling study again, and we have prepared that earlier. So in endocrine system, it's simply in one word we say hormone, and how hormone works, how hormone function. That's all about the endocrine system. We know these are chemical signals that goes from one cell to the remote target cells, and chemicals for direct cell to cell communication, and chemicals that cross a gap between two adjacent cells, and all of it included in the endocrine system in the hormone. Now in all this case, what we know is that these 3 types of cell signaling is there. Chemical signal molecule released from one cell and work to the remote area, chemicals for direct cell to cell interactions, and chemical that crosses a gap between two adjacent cells. And the type of all these 3 types of cell signaling process works almost equally in our body. Now when we talk about hormones, we talk about chemical signals released from one cell, one particular type of cell, and it's transferred to a remote location, a remote target location, and works there. That is the endocrine system. So remember earlier we have talked about something. We have talked about that there are different modes of cellular communication. The modes of cellular communication can be fast, the modes of cellular communication will be very slow. Now their functions are different, and the reason there is the reason that their functions are different, because they have different role to play. For example, there is direct cell-cell contacts possible. Iron small molecules can take entry or exit with this direct cell-cell contact with the gap junctions, okay, linking the cytoplasm of the adjacent cells. This is a direct contact, and we know the direct contact is important, and we've seen plenty of examples in the immunology regarding the direct cell contact. Apart from that, we've also studied earlier, this picture is not new, it's earlier discussed as well, like synaptic transmission, where 2 neurons are involved in the time of exchanging chemical components with axon of one neuron and dendrites of the other neuron. And that's how the interaction works between excitatory or inhibitory neurotransmitters released from one neuron controlling the other one, and they can transfer the signal from one neuron to the other. Now this neuron transfer lead to the release of hormones, lead to the release of other proteins factors, and most of the time those are hormones, and we call them neurosecretory cells, which gets excited by the nerve impulse and then releases the hormone. Third one, paracrine signaling. Paracrine signaling is based on the local hormones, where one cell, which is the donor cell, releases component outside, and those chemical factors can trigger responses in multiple types of cells, and diffusion, but this works very locally, not in the distant location. Example of that, prostaglandin based process. Okay, this is a local hormone mediated signaling. Then endocrine signaling's typical feature is the donor cell will be placed far away from the target. So donor cell releases components, which is a chemical signaling molecule. Hormones are nothing but chemical signaling molecules. Now those chemical signaling molecules will be traveled through the bloodstream and finally reaches the target location. Now the target can be of different places. For example, our gland, which is known as a master gland, say pituitary is placed far up part of the body, where it releases hormones that will work on the different parts of the body. It will work on the adrenal cortex, it works on the gonad and many different parts of the body, which is far away from the location of pituitary. One such example here we see insulin hormone, the hormone that is responsible for taking up excess glucose in the blood and converting them into glycogen, storing them in our body, okay, so that we can use it in the future part. Okay, so hormones and receptors. Hormones, like chemical messengers, travel through body and target cell organ or cell that are hormone effects, okay, with included in the hormone effects. So there are two types. Remember, based on the efficiency of the signaling, we can divide them into two different types. One type is a very fast signaling, we can say a fast signaling, a fast response. Another one is a slow response. Now fast response is always brought with the help of nerve, because neuron's job is to relay the information very, very fast, right? And because it's linked with the situations like reflexes and stuff, where we need to travel the information faster. On the other hand, hormones always deal with the slow response, and slow response means hormone releases and diffuse slowly. It also acts slowly, but the activity of the hormone remains for a long duration of time, where the nerve impulse is transient, although fast, but it's transient in nature. Now among the hormones activity as well, that is a part of the slow activity. Among hormones activity as well, there are two different types of hormones that will work, because as I said, it's nothing but a chemical signaling. In that case, the hormone molecule will bind with the receptor extracellularly, and binding of the hormone to the receptor can trigger a response inside the cell. That is one kind of hormonal response. On the other hand, the response can be a hormone which can directly take entry inside the nucleus, where it finds a receptor inside the nucleus and bind with it, and then can trigger the response in terms of transcription of target DNA, okay, target genes. So that's the difference. So they are the difference between peptide hormones and steroid hormones. The peptide hormones acts as extracellular hormones, where the hormone molecule itself binds to the extracellular receptor and triggers a response, while the steroid hormones directly take entry inside the nucleus, bind with the receptor, and then can carry on the process of transcription. So that's the difference between the two. Although in these two processes, the one which involves the extracellular receptor is also a faster one, fastest choice, because it involved direct and fast response in the cytosol itself, where the steroid hormone needs some time to go inside the nucleus to start its proper process. And as these are the cell signaling processes, and we also know there are two types of cell signaling process in terms of responsibility, that is a very fast response or very slow response, depending upon what kind of modifications they are involved with. There are few types of signaling where the signaling molecule ultimately causes a change in the cytosolic component. The component is freely available in the cytosol, may be inactive. Now due to the signaling molecule, that molecule gets activated. So those type of signaling is much fast, right? On the other hand, sometimes there are signaling molecule, the end product of which causes the transcriptional activation of certain target genes, which take much long time to proceed, okay, because at this point inside the DNA it will take much long time to continue, because it needs to go inside the nucleus and then bind and activate transcription factors, bind with it, and then regulate it. Now, these are the general properties of hormones, but now if we consider the source of hormones in our body, with all the glands which produces hormones, we'll check the name of those glands, the type of hormones that they produce, and their necessary functions. So let's talk about it. The first gland that we always talk about is always master gland, known as a pituitary gland, that signals other glands to produce their respective hormones when they are needed. And we can divide this pituitary gland into two different portions structurally: anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary is a part, both of this anterior and posterior pituitary are connected with a part of the brain known as hypothalamus, and you should remember this name. It's kind of the thermostat of our brain. Not only thermostat, but hypothalamus is one of the key places in our brain that help us regulating the homeostasis. And you remember one thing while you're studying human physiology is that it's all about body's homeostasis. Homeostasis means, in a very simple terms, is to keep every single properties of our body in the optimum condition as they are currently in. That means the body temperature, body blood pressure, the water content of our body, the calcium level in blood, and many more things that should be controlled at a certain concentration in our body. It should not excess that or go below the desired amount. Now, this pituitary gland signals many other glands in our body, like thyroid gland, parathyroid gland. It signals the adrenal gland. It signals the beta cells like a pancreas as well, so to secrete different types of hormones, and they're linked with their function. Now, this anterior lobe of the pituitary receives the signal from the hypothalamus and responds by sending an appropriate hormones to the endocrine glands, the necessary endocrine glands. So pituitary is a master, and pituitary is not affecting any of the function of our body directly, but it is activating or influencing other glands of our body to release hormones. That's how it's controlling all the other glands. While the posterior part of the pituitary receives oxytocin or antidiuretic hormone from the hypothalamus directly, it relays them to the body as necessary. That's the difference between the two. So most of the hormones that are released by the pituitary are from the anterior lobe. So let's talk about the type of hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland. Here you can see all of it. The first few hormones list given here, till this point, except the last two, are from anterior pituitary. The last two hormones here from the posterior part of the pituitary. Okay, so anterior pituitary secretes follicle stimulating hormone. They have a short name for FSH. Stimulates egg maturation in the ovary and releases sex hormone, okay, for both. Okay, luteinizing hormone stimulates the maturation of egg and the corpus luteum surrounding the egg, which affects the female sex hormone and the menstrual cycle. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroxine hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, causes the adrenal gland to release cortisol. Melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, stimulates the synthesis of skin pigments, production of melanin. Growth hormone stimulates the growth of the cells during infancy and puberty. Now remember all those cell signaling pathways that we saw earlier, the GPCR mediated pathways like epidermal growth factor, vascular endothelium epidermal growth factors, platelet derived growth factors. All those growth factors are somehow, they are kind of this growth hormone. They are kind of the signaling molecule which binds with the growth hormone receptor on the surface, which is the GPCR, and then it triggers a series of reactions inside. Antidiuretic hormone, ADH, antidiuretic hormone, signals the kidney to conserve more water during the water stress condition of our body, which is secreted by the posterior pituitary, by the way. Oxytocin affects childbirth, lactation, and some behavior in the female, okay, who is undergoing pregnancy as well. Okay, so oxytocin is that kind of hormone here. Now, other endocrine hormones. So all these hormones that we've seen now, that we've listed and talked about, all of them, they are secreted by the pituitary gland. Either they are from the anterior pituitary or from the posterior pituitary, but they have a role, and their role is to instigate other glands to release their respective hormones. So now we are going to see the other glands which are under the regulation of pituitary gland to secrete hormones, and what kind of hormones they secrete and what are their functions. So for example, thyroid gland, it secretes two types of hormones, thyroxine and calcitonin. Thyroxine hormone regulates metabolism. That's the primary role of thyroid gland. It regulates the metabolism and also is responsible for the BMR and regulation of BMR. While thyroid also releases calcitonin. It inhibits the release of calcium from the bones. So it causes the bone to retain calcium. Okay. And parathyroid hormone secreted by the parathyroid gland stimulates the release of calcium from the bones. So if you look at both of this, calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, they are kind of doing the opposite functions. So calcitonin inhibits the release of calcium from the bones, while parathyroid stimulates the release of calcium from the bones. So both of this calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, they work together for the calcium ion concentration in the blood, for the calcium ion concentration homeostasis in the blood. That's the important role for it. Islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. Beta cell secretes insulin, alpha cell secretes glucagon. Insulin causes the decreased blood sugar by uptaking glucose by the cell. Glucagon increases the blood sugar by stimulating the breakdown of glycogen. By this manner, insulin and glucagon together also induces, and actually it regulates the homeostasis of glucose, blood glucose level, while calcitonin and parathyroid causes the homeostasis of blood calcium level. Then testis secretes testosterone, ovaries secretes both estrogen and progesterone. So testis secretes testosterone, regulates the sperm cell production and secondary sexual characteristics, while ovaries like estrogen stimulates egg maturation, controls secondary sex characteristics. Progesterone prepares the uterus to receive a fertilized egg. Okay. Now adrenal cortex secretes epinephrine. The cortex part of the adrenal gland secretes epinephrine, stimulates fight or flight response. Remember, although the medulla part of the adrenal gland can produce many different types of hormones. So one of them is glucocorticoids, parts of the stress response, increase blood glucose level and decreases immune response. And aldosterone regulates the sodium content in the blood, again related to the sodium concentration in the blood homeostasis. Testosterone also being regulated by the adrenal medulla, although this testosterone which is regulated and released by the adrenal medulla is for the both sexes, because you know females also have the effect of testosterone in their body, and actually this testosterone is required to be released for the actual measurement and determination of the body mass. So greater muscle mass buildup in both the sexes. Pineal gland secretes melatonin, which is also known as the sleep hormone. Is responsible for the sleep cycles, reproductive cycles in many mammals, but for human related with the sleep cycles, and part of involved with preparing our body to feel sleepy, things like that. So now, as we have seen the list of different hormones that are produced by the glands as well as their respective functions, we also need to know how exactly these hormones involved with one another to regulate the blood homeostasis, body homeostasis, and we'll see few of the homeostasis responses and how they are regulated. Temperature control, for an example, if you look at here, the temperature control, body temperature homeostasis means obviously you have a fixed body temperature, that is 98.4 degree Fahrenheit, or approximately near about 37 degrees Celsius temperature. Now it can go high, it can go low. If the body temperature goes higher than this desired one, then what will happen, it increase the body temperature when so we need to decrease the body temperature down. So our body's hypothalamus, which is also known as the thermostat, can detect the body's overheat or high temperature. It introduces all the mechanism to low down the body temperature. One of such mechanism is the skin blood vessel dilatation. So dilatation of the skin blood vessel can cause those warm blood to be in very contact with the surface of the skin, that will allow the exchange of heat, okay, through the surrounding environment. That's one thing. The second thing, it also introduces the formation of sweat by activating the sweat glands. So sweat causes the evaporative cooling. In that case, it will take up the heat from the skin and can evaporate and cause evaporative cooling. That both of these mechanisms together can bring the body temperature down. Okay, so once the body temperature goes down, then the desired amount, then they also begin the other mechanism, that is the body's mechanism to heat things up. And how exactly body will heat things up? Two separate mechanisms. One, skin blood vessels constrict, causes to increase the blood flow, like blood pressure in the bloodstream. That increases the body temperature. Second is muscle shivering. That's what another thing involved is core body temperature goes down. Skeletal muscle activated, shivering generates a lot of heat, and body temperature increases. Thermostat shuts off the warm machinery and then again shifts back to the normal body temperature. So in both this case, the hypothalamus of our body pretend the temperature change, either the higher temperature or the low temperature. Depending upon the temperature change they witness, they involve in changing the situation. Okay, so here we saw both of it. Now both this body's temperature mechanism is very much important. Without this regulation, a person can have hypothermia or hyperthermia. Okay, now let's move to the other homeostasis. The second one, blood pressure regulation. Body's temperature regulation is not that difficult process. It's quite easy process, but blood pressure regulation is a really difficult thing, which involves multiple organs of our body. That's why blood pressure is not a single unified thing. It's regulated by multiple things. So whenever we have a high or low blood pressure, that is linked with many different situations. So for example, blood pressure regulation, actually when the body's blood pressure gets reduced to a certain level, because our body always try to fix a particular blood pressure which is required for the body to function in a healthy manner. That is 80, 120 120 by 80 mmHg. So that is the pressure that is, although that pressure range may vary from the age differences and gender biased fashion, but still that's a fixed blood pressure that should be maintained. Without that blood pressure, we cannot survive in a healthy way. So if the blood pressure is decreased, in that case what will happen? In that case, kidney will release renin, and renin will cause the angiotensinogen, which is produced by liver, to be converted into angiotensin 1, and angiotensin 1 moves to the lungs, and they move in the lungs because in the lung capillaries there is an enzyme known as angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Once angiotensin 2 is produced, this is the active form of angiotensin, and this angiotensin causes two separate mechanisms: vasoconstriction, that causes the increased blood pressure, because obviously if you consider the blood vessels as a pipe, and if you constrict that diameter of the pipe, then obviously we are creating immense pressure on the blood flow. Second thing, it also causes the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, that increases the water reabsorption and decreases the urine volume. It also causes the blood pressure to rise, because if we have more water reabsorption in our body, then it will obviously increase our blood pressure inside the blood vessel. Okay, so this is the picture of blood pressure regulation. Angiotensin, renin convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, angiotensin converting enzyme converting angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 also causes the breakdown of aldosterone and ADH. It causes the activation to aldosterone and ADH. Aldosterone causes the nephron distal tubule to reabsorb more sodium and water, increasing the blood volume, while ADH mediates the insertion of aquaporins into nephron collecting duct cells, and results more water is reabsorbed into the blood. Okay, in both the way it increases the blood volume, that also increases the blood pressure. So this is a very basic way of regulating it. The third kind of homeostasis we will discuss is the blood calcium level, which is also being regulated by two separate hormones secreted by two different glands. Now again, the calcium homeostasis in blood is 9 to 11 milligram of calcium in 100 ml of blood, but there is always a chance of imbalance, and the imbalance is like either the blood calcium level can increase above this level. In that case, thyroid gland releases calcitonin. And what calcitonin will do? Calcitonin stimulates the calcium salt deposits into the bone, because blood calcium is always required for certain functionality, but out for that, if we have excess calcium in the blood, then obviously our body will try to store it in a medium, and that storing is always done inside the bone. Okay, that's because the bone is a huge reservoir of calcium. So calcitonin will cause the conversion of calcium and deposits of calcium in the bone. Now that causes the blood calcium to be balanced. Now if the blood calcium level falls down the desired amount, then what will happen? That imbalance is sensed by the body, and then the parathyroid gland will be instigated to release parathyroid hormone, and this PTH will causes the release of calcium from the bone. So bone cells, which was a reservoir of calcium, now they will release all those calcium from the bone to the blood. So now blood will receive the adequate calcium, and that will replenish the total calcium amount in the blood. Okay. Okay. Blood sugar control. We all know about the blood sugar regulation. We've talked about that earlier, and we also know the cell signaling behind the blood sugar regulation, but let's talk about that again. Now again, the homeostasis states the blood glucose level should be maintained at a certain amount. Now if you go high or low, there are two possibilities. If you go high, then it's obviously greater than 120 milligram % of the sugar. We call them hyperglycemic condition in the blood. At this condition, the beta cells of the pancreas are stimulated, and they will release insulin, and the insulin will cause the body cells to take up more glucose from the blood, and liver takes up the glucose and stores it as glycogen. Okay, and blood glucose level declines, and a set point is result. Then blood glucose level also can fall down a certain level. If it falls down a certain level, then the alpha cell of the pancreas is stimulated to release the glucagon hormone. Now the glucagon hormone is again goes there in the liver, and liver breaks down the glycogen and releases glucose to the blood. Now once the glucose is released to the blood, then again the blood glucose level is restored, and it is balanced at its condition. Control of hormone release. Now all the hormones that we saw, all the hormones that are secreted by the pituitary gland as well as the other hormone, especially the hormone secretion, is primarily regulated by the pituitary gland, because it's a master gland. All the other tissues in all the other glands of the body, like the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, pancreas, and all the other glands which secretes the hormone, is under the regulation of the pituitary gland. So when we say pituitary gland and how this involved in the regulation, pituitary gland, the primary level of hormone regulation is mediated between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay, so pituitary hypothalamus axis, this is very, very important, and it's always working like a negative feedback loop. So for example, those part, because anterior and posterior pituitary, especially the anterior pituitary, which is responsible to provide the most of the signals. So this anterior pituitary, it releases the hormone. So hypothalamus provides the signal to the anterior pituitary to release specific hormone. Once the hormones are released, at that condition, due to the release of the hormone, that hormone will cause the hypothalamus to stop the synthesis. Okay, and that thing is always fixed. Let me give you one example that will help you to understand. Let me tell you the example of growth hormone and how it is regulated. Okay, this one example will help you to understand how exactly these hormones are regulated. So this is the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus cells, these are neurosecretory cells, because they get excited due to the release of due to the nerve impulse which is generated at the first place. Now once the nerve impulse is generated, and this hypothalamus releases one type of hormone known as growth hormone release hormone, GHRH. So growth hormone release hormone causes the somatotrope of our body, somatotrope of what? Somatotrop of pituitary gland. So this is the type of cell in pituitary gland which is supposed to produce growth hormone. So once they get this release of GHRH, then somatotrophs start releasing growth hormones. They start producing growth hormones which will act in different parts of the body, either bone, muscles, liver, all the tissues, and allow these tissues to grow. And remember, all those growth factor associated cell signaling are actually due to the results of this growth hormone which is being secreted, which is being released. Now once the growth hormone is prepared, then the release of all those growth hormones, especially the factors like insulin growth factors and stuff, it's going to provide a negative or inhibitory signal to the hypothalamus that yes, adequate amount of growth hormone has been produced, so no further growth hormone is required. So another hormone is there known as growth hormone inhibiting hormone, or GHIH, which is also known as somatostatin. The same thing. So somatostatin is growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and also the insulin like growth factor. All these hormones which are being prepared from the cell which is now currently have adequate supply of the hormone can ultimately trigger the stop and what we can say the block in the synthesis of further growth hormones from the pituitary.